Anthony Moore, and I have the pleasure of being the Executive Director for New Hampshire Humanities. For those of you who are new to this series or just to New Hampshire Humanities in general, we're a statewide nonprofit, having worked in the state for 47 years. We're one of 55 state humanities organizations that are operating in all 50 states plus the territories as an affiliated partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities. At New Hampshire Humanities, for those you don't know, we strive to connect all people with the inspiring and challenging ideas of the human experience. And we do this really with an understanding that for us to be successful in this work, the quality and the integrity of our programs, our grants, and our other related opportunities requires that they be offered by, accessible to, and in collaboration with a diverse group of people, especially the voices of those whose stories have not been fully or accurately represented in history. This evening is a continuation of that tradition as we explore reparations, its history and impact, and why now, as part of New Hampshire Humanities Black Thought series. Tonight's presentation represents the third program in this season's four-part series. And for those of you who are new to the Black Thought series, it represents New Hampshire Humanities' attempt at bringing the perspectives of Black America to the humanities. I'd be remiss if I didn't say this work would not be possible without the support of our sponsors. And as such, I'd like to thank New Hampshire Charitable Foundation for their support of this season's Black Thought series and for their ongoing and enduring support of the humanities. So shout out to the Charitable Foundation. Before introducing our colleague Woullard Lett, I want to remind you again that next week is the fourth and final program of this season's, and it's our honor to have Dr. Yvonne Goldsberry join us in the conversation with her program, Awakening to Racism as a Public Health Issue, a Historical Perspective. Dr. Goldsberry presentation again is scheduled for a week from today, same time, same bat channel. So that's November 18th at 6 p.m. And additional information and the registration link is available at nhhumanities.org. Now, if I'm not mistaken, our colleague had already put that in the chat function for you if you want to rush over there and get registered. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our colleague, Woullard Lett. Woullard Lett is the regional lead for the New England region of the Unitarian Universalist Association. He also serves as the co-chair of the Manchester NAACP's Education Committee and male co-chair of the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America's Education Committee, or Commission rather. His current work as a religious professional allows him to lift the sacred and the secular by highlighting the theological underpinnings of the choices we make day to day. His work as an academic and social activist has been consistently been value-centered rather and community-focused. Without further ado, Woullard, you have the stage, sir. Please feel free.
Okay, thank you, Anthony, and good evening. It will be my pleasure, my honor and pleasure to talk to you tonight about the topic of reparations. I have a short presentation, and let me just say that when Anthony first contacted me about doing this, I told him that, and he's like, oh yeah, you know, we want to do it, and it will be an hour coming up. And I told him right away, I said, like, look, man, an hour is not long enough to do it justice, but what I will do is something. So I'm here to do something and talk about reparations, its history, and its importance, and actually why now, why is it in the news now? And you know, what relevance does it have to the world that we live in today? So I want to start with a quote that one of my mentors, the Honorable Harvey Kai, just reminded me the other day. Said to be sure to mention this Frederick Douglass quote that talks about the need for ongoing engagement and commitment, even in the face of you know, resistance and seeming lack of progress, you know, because if something is really worth having, if something is really worth doing, then it's worth putting the energy into. So, and the reparations issue epitomizes the idea that no struggle, no progress. And this is consistent also with our friend, the esteemed African philosopher, Amilcar Cabral, who said, tell no lies, claim no easy victories. And that's certainly true in light of the work that we have to do in relationship to reparations. So let's first begin with at least a discussion about the concept of reparations. What is reparations? Most people who think about reparations think about it in, or who've heard about it in the popular, dialogue and general discussion. Think about it in a fairly limited perspective that reflects the kind of larger societal low context view that the world that we live in pretty much is focused, particularly because of its grounding in both European culture and the Enlightenment. And so when people think about reparations, they really think about money, they're thinking about a contract, but reparations is, and also another important element of people's perception of reparations is that it's not only that it's charity, but also that it's about revenge. And tonight's presentation, I hope to lift up the fact that reparations is not about revenge, it's about repair. And that is the fundamental core of the term and the work that happens around reparations. And in fact, as we think about this, I want to lift up the fact that we're talking about reparations. So reparations can be appropriate for any kind of exploitive or relationship where there's harm. But in particular, in common language, common knowledge, generally when we're talking about reparations, we're talking about reparations or repair for the insult of African chattel slavery. And something that's I find really interesting is that there has been one case of the US government paying reparations for African chattel slavery in particular. And that was back in 1862. And it happened in Washington, D.C., where the enslavers in Washington, D.C. were paid reparations due to emancipation at that time. But the enslaved continues from then until today, struggling around this issue or engaged in the struggle for reparations for African chattel slavery. When we look at the record, we find it points us back to, not November 12th. I think what's today is the 11th. So I think it's appropriate that we're here today, November 12th in 1779, right here in New Hampshire. There were 20 enslaved Africans, including Prince Whipple. Some of you may be familiar with him, who were enslaved in Portsmouth. They petitioned the New Hampshire General Assembly for their freedom, and they said that that we've heard all this talk about freedom and liberty that is being bandied about in the community. Well, we aspire to those same values, and we hope we lift up those same things. So, we want to be emancipated to enjoy those same unalienable rights that's endowed by our Creator. And that petition was heard by the New Hampshire General Assembly. I think it was 254 years later or something like that. I was at the New Hampshire State House maybe about 5 years ago when that petition was finally heard. While the petitioners did not name reparations as the aim of the petition, definitely they were seeking to repair the broken covenant within the human family that allowed them to be held as property in chattel slavery. That's one of the earliest urges, and where we see reparations coming up. Then we move up a few more years, and in 1783, in our down the road in our sister New Hampshire, New England state, Massachusetts, Belinda Royale petitioned the Massachusetts General Assembly successfully for a pension after her enslaver died, with the rationale that his wealth was, due to the work that she had done. And many of us have heard the term 40 acres and a mule in relationship to enslaved or formerly enslaved Africans after the Civil War. And we trace that back to 1865, where General William Tecumseh Sherman issued what was Special Field Order number 15 in South Carolina, where the property of traders to the United States, people who had taken up arms against the United States government, former plantation owners, their property was confiscated and divided among the formerly enslaved Africans that had worked that land. And, and from that came the term, or on the basis of 40 acres and a mule. And that order was overturned with the, along with many other actions taken on behalf of the formerly enslaved Africans, the whole Reconstruction movement with the death of Abraham Lincoln. Then in 1870, we see a case, I believe it's in Ohio, where Henrietta Wood, how many of you saw the movie 12 Years a Slave? Okay, yeah, that was a Hollywood dramatization of human trafficking and kidnapping, where a free person of African descent was kidnapped and then sold into slavery. And the same thing happened to Henrietta Wood. She was able to, once she gained her freedom with the end of the Civil War, she took her kidnapper to court and successfully sued to be compensated for that, that indignity. A couple of years later, another generation, 20 years, we have Callie House and Isaiah Dickerson, who organized something called the National Ex-Slave Mutual Relief Bounty and Pension Association. After the Civil War, the both Union soldiers and some Confederates received pensions. And Callie House and Isaiah Dickerson took up the call to support the formerly enslaved Africans who, once African chattel slavery ended, were left with no means of support, no viable support. Even the minor effort by Sherman to provide just the basic tools to create a living had been taken away, as limited as it was. And so Callie House used her right as a citizen to petition the US government to redress what she felt was wrong. And she went around the country organizing. She had the largest mass-based organization of people of African descent up until its time. And what happened? Well, the US government said, this woman is creating this outcry for pensions for ex-slaves. Let's see if we can neutralize her. So they arrested her for using the Postal Service to solicit membership in her organization. And they said that, well, she was using a mail to defraud because she knew that the US government would never honor her request. So by just exercising her right to petition the government, Callie House ended up in jail for that. Then things pick up a little bit. In 1919, some of you may be familiar with Marcus Garvey and the United Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League. One of the things that he asked, that the organization that he headed asked for, was support from the government for economic development and repatriation to Africa. In the 50s, the Nation of Islam, under the leadership of Elijah Muhammad, put forth a request. In fact, the Nation of Islam said, hey, you know, people of here, people here in the US, in America, people of African descent, even up into the 50s, had been treated, you know, poorly, lynchings, discrimination. He said if the people, American of European descent, want to separate from folk of African descent, then give us land, you know, give us tax abatement, and provide us with educational institutions, and we'll build our own, you know, our own resources and live by ourselves. In 51, Paul Robeson, William Patterson, and W.B. Du Bois ended up petitioning the government, I guess it wasn't the United Nations at that time, by launching the genocide campaign, focusing on what was happening to people of African descent. And in 1956, Robert Brock formed a self-determination committee that advocated for reparations into the 90s out on the West Coast in Los Angeles. And Queen Mother Audley Moore and the Universal Association of Ethiopian Women began their petitioning of the United Nations for reparations, both in 57 and 59. And Queen Mother Moore came out of the Marcus Garvey movement, and she became an important figure and an important advocate for reparations. In 1962, she was involved with an organization she helped create called the Reparations Committee that again petitioned the UN. And in 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King, in one of his speeches, called for a redress of historical victimization and contemporary exploitation. He did not say the word reparations, but he was asking for the kind of repair that reparations is designed to provide. In 1966, Black Panther Party issued its call for reparations through its 10-point program. And in 68, the Republic of New Africa said that they wanted what's called the Black Belt states in the Southern US and several $1 billion to create its own government, its own country. And again, in response to American apartheid and segregation, saying, well, you know, let's do away with segregation. Let's allow, you know, if the government and the country wants us to be separated, then, you know, let's come up with a plan so that people of African descent can be separate. The Black Belt states were Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and the Carolinas, I believe. And some of you may be familiar with the 1969 Black Manifesto that came out of the Black National Economic Conference and the call for churches to pay reparations. I think the demand was like $5 billion at the time, put forth by George Foreman. And finally, the National Black Political Convention of 1972 passed a resolution calling for reparations that was shared with all the presidential candidates at that time. We pretty much, I say we, but the contemporary reparations movement is pretty much pegged to the creation of the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America in 1987. And this organization was formed as a coordinating body for all organizations comprised of people of African descent who were interested in reparations. So rather than just, these disparate, separate voices making calls. We said, let's come together and create a united demand. And again, our neighbor to the south, Massachusetts, in 1988, one of its senators, State Senator Bill Owens, who's still with us, God bless him, filed Senate Bill 1621, the first state level, the first, I think, governmental, I want to say legislative attempt to create or to attain reparations since the Reconstruction. And that bill, Senate bill, the Massachusetts Senate Bill 1621, became the model or the framework that Congressman John Conyers used to introduce a reparations bill in the U.S. House of Representatives, House Resolution 40. When he first introduced it, it had a different number, but he recognized the symbolic importance of 40 acres and a mule and changed the House number. And from 1989 until he retired, about 5 years ago, something like that, every year except for, I think, maybe the first Obama presidential term, John Conyers introduced that steady bill. It was the HR 40 steady bill in the House of Representatives. Also around that time, the first Pan-African Conference on reparations was held in Abuja, Nigeria, where the theory around reparations that had been developed here in the US was shared more widely within in the African world, and people in different countries were saying like, yeah, well, we were harmed as well by the European colonizers. I'm sure some of you have heard of how the Belgians, mutilated African people in terms of trying to force them to mine copper, and in Namibia, how there were massacres that even today in their in the respective countries, their efforts to attain reparations for those acts. And again, another UN petition was put forth in 1994 by the Lost and Found Nation of Islam under the leadership of Silas Muhammad. So, and these efforts continue in the spirit of the original quote by our friend and the philosopher Frederick Douglass, that that power concedes to nothing but a demand, and that in order to have crops, you got to dig up the ground. And these folk who have been working, these are some examples of people who have been working in the vineyard for reparations. Something that happened in 2000, which brought reparations back into the spotlight, maybe not into the national spotlight, but it raised its profiles significantly, was legal work. There are several different theories about reparations, who should pay. And one is that not just that one theory is that the government should pay because the government allowed it, and it was governmental rules that provided the framework that established it. Another theory is that, well, corporations who benefited from it are liable as well. And so Attorney Deidre Farmer-Pellman led an effort in the courts with the lawsuit against legal campaign against corporations, some corporations that, and those corporations that exist today that count and trace their history back into the era of slavery and how they benefited directly from that. Then in 2001, the World Conference Against Racism was held in South Africa, and part of by the United Nations, and part of the proceedings out of that conference, the Durban Declaration, declared the transatlantic African chattel enslavement system as a crime against humanity. And the transatlantic African chattel enslavement system is generally referred to as the transatlantic slave trade. And the reason that it's important to have this longer name, longer description of what that whole process was, is because part of what happened and with the process was that people were dehumanized, and they were considered, property. They were considered chattel. They weren't considered people. They were considered a commodity. And that commodification included renaming them. Instead of being people, they became slaves, which was something then that would become marketable. In 2015, the National African American Reparations Commission was formed under the leadership of Ryan Daniels. And in 2016, in Philadelphia, at a hearing, a United Nations hearing, there was a declaration of that people of African descent who were descendants of Africans formerly enslaved in the US should adopt as a identifier this term deus. In 2018, which is a couple of years ago, another group was formed. The millennials formed an organization called African Descendants of Slaves. And it's been very active on social media. And then finally in 2019, the House of Representatives held a hearing on reparations, and I think it was on Juneteenth, and that got a lot of attention. So that brings us from the 1600s up till today in terms of the history of reparations. So when we say, when we're talking about reparations and we say, oh, it's about repair, well, repair what? Well, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America identified 5 injury areas, and they are peoplehood or nationhood. And it speaks to, first, the degradation of the consideration of African people, which resulted in the dehumanization of the African personality in the European imagination. That served as a rationalization to justify treating African people as property, as less than human. And their whole peoplehood, as well as their cultural practices, were destroyed in that process. Another injury area was education. Some of you may have heard, most of us are familiar with the fact that during the period of African chattel slavery, it was a crime to teach an enslaved African to read or write. And even if you were European and you were caught doing that, you too was subject to penalty. A third area is in the area of health, where enslaved Africans were treated, both African people in the area of health were treated to torturous experiments. There's a guy, Dr. James Marion Sims, who's considered the father of gynecology. Google him. But you'll see they talk about all his great work, but what they don't tell you is that his work was based on the torture and disfigurement of enslaved African women. And when he's held up, that's totally discounted. Also, even more recently, the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, which ended in the 1970s, was an experiment where down in Tuskegee, Alabama, men of African descent who had syphilis were enrolled into a clinical program and told that they were being given treatment, drugs to treat their syphilis, when actually they were being given placebos. And the purpose of the study was to document the degradation of the health of these men while their syphilis went untreated. And I'm focusing, it occurred to me when I'm talking about health, that when we talk about the injuries, the 5 injury areas, we're not just talking about historical wrongs and harms, but we're also talking about contemporary things. When criminal punishment is a fourth area, injury area. And in the United States, the law enforcement, the court system, and the jail and prison systems were not created to provide justice for people of African descent, but they were created to punish people of African descent. These institutions weren't developed or designed to serve and protect people of African descent, but to command and control people of African descent. So from in the past up until contemporary times, right now we see mass incarceration of people of African descent, and that happens through this criminal punishment system. And the fifth injury area is wealth and poverty, where the expropriated labor of people of African descent in the past, and even currently, the expropriated wealth of assets continues to hold people of African descent in a poverty status. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the Boston Federal Reserve report that looked at wealth in the Boston area and said the average family of European descent had wealth of about like $208,000, and the average family of African descent had wealth of $8. And that was in the last 4 or 5 years. I have a copy of the study I can provide, but and then nationally, I think they say something like, when we look at wealth, that people of African descent have 10 cents to every dollar compared to people of European descent in the terms of wealth. So those areas, while they were, the injury was started during this prior period of slavery, the vestiges of that system continue today, and they continue to be a problem. So what can we do about it? Well, the international definition of reparations provides 5 elements of repair. And those are restitution, which is restoring the victim to their original situation; compensation, which most people focus on to the exclusion of all other items in the discussion that we have in popular culture here in the US, money; rehabilitation, because it's been documented scientifically that there is something called historical trauma that results from epigenetic changes, changes in the way the genes express themselves from being under stress and attack. And we see that even today in contemporary times, those same factors of stress and being under attack continue. When we talk about Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, you name it, we'll have another name tomorrow. And being in that situation, creates the conditions, some of these conditions of morbidity that results in things like higher death rates during this COVID-19 pandemic, as well as other things. Cessation and guarantee of non-repeat speaks to the need to really not just attempt to legislate morality, but also to regulate behavior. Because part of the challenge that we face around this issue of reparations, and one of the key factors that's important in reparations, is that people have been miseducated willingly and intentionally about the nature of society and our relationship as a human family. There's some of you on this call today, I bet, who think that because I'm melanin enhanced and you're melanin deficient, that you and I are less alike than someone who shares our situation. And that's an educational problem. That's an educational problem when we have the schools of education, the institutional educational institutions from primary school to advanced degrees, continuing to promote this patently false notion that there's such that the human family can be categorized into these separate groups that we call races, and that this idea that phenotypical features like whether you're melanin enhanced or not has something that has a relationship to our essential nature and our essential qualities. Rehabilitation means that, you know, that society needs to be dealt with in order to make a change in that regard. Cessation and non-repeat is what we are referring to when we look at the many attempts that we've seen over the years to pass laws and policies and prohibitions saying don't do this, don't do that, and yet this and that continues to happen. And the fifth element of the international definition of reparations is satisfaction. And Avuche, Dr. Dorothy Benton Lewis said about this particular element that it's not over till we say it's over. Satisfaction means providing not only an accurate account of the violations, but it also involves restoring the dignity and the reputation and the rights of the victim. And for the dignity to be restored, the victim, the aggrieved party has to have a say. And when that happens, how much is enough? So I'm running out of time, but I'm wrapping up here. And to say that reparations is about repair. It's about covenant, not contract. And reparations is about repair in the sense that reparations is not about revenge. It's about justice. And so, in a relationship where there is, in an abusive relationship, when the abused party comes out the room with a black eye and a broken arm, you don't put a splint on the arm and makeup under the eye and send them back in, to be abused again. You deal with the abused who's been injured, and you deal with the abuser who is the injurer. So reparations is about repair, and it's about repairing the covenant between these members of the human family. It's not this low context thing about a contract. Oh, well, how much, how much is it worth? How much is your life worth? How much is your time worth? We'll pay you off and it's all taken care of. It's not a contract. It's about covenant. And as such, then there are both internal and external reparations or repair that needs to happen. For both the abused and the abuser, there are certain things that both parties need and have to do, but they can only do that themselves. When we talk about white supremacy and Black inferiority in this society, those members of the community who are identified with or identify with white supremacy, they got some work they need to do because there's a problem there and there's some sickness there, but only they can do that work. And that's the internal work. And the same token for those in society who are victims of Black inferiority, within that community, there's some work that they have to do, and only they can do that work. And that's internal work. That's the internal repair that has to happen. But also there are external things, external reparations that need to happen. And we saw some of that in the international definition. Compensation is part of the external work. Rehabilitation, restitution. So there are internal and external aspects of all the elements of the repair that's required by reparations. So that is why it is important for us today. And I'll stop there so we have time for questions.
Thank you very much. We've got a question in the chat already, but anyone who's got more questions can type them right into the chat where the other ones have popped up. Anthony, did you want to start?
Well, no, why don't we start with Antonia's question first, and then I'll do a question, please.
Okay, so we've got a question in the chat from Antonia who asks, she wants to know, does affirmative action fit under the reparations umbrella?
Uh, we have to define our terms, and that's why I took the time to say that reparations, in the context in which I'm bringing it, means repair. I would say that the thing that we have to, when we talk about reparations, we're talking about full repair. We're talking about all 5 elements of the international definition of repair. And affirmative action might fit under one of those 5. It may partially meet the requirement for one of those 5 elements, but in no way is it sufficient. It's necessary, but insufficient.
Thank you, Woullard. I'm going to ask a follow-up question because I know you may have a personal connection to this issue. So not too long ago, a couple of years ago, if you're looking, Georgetown University had come up with a settlement about 2019. And for those of you who aren't aware, this is pre-civil era. Georgetown University sold 272 slaves, if I understand. They were maintained.
No. You don't understand. They didn't sell 272 slaves. They sold 272 enslaved African people.
Thank you. My apology. So they sold 272 humans who were enslaved, individuals of African descent, to prop up the university, keep it afloat. They've identified the need to make reparations and some form of restitution in the form of they're raising, I believe it's almost $400,000 a year to support local public health institutions and schools, etc. That's about all I know. Can you expand on it a little bit? And I do, if I'm not mistaken, I think you have a personal connection to this issue as well. And I'd love to hear just a little bit about
it. Yeah, I am connected to that. My maternal great-grandmother's sister married one of the descendants of one of the enslaved Africans. And so I have cousins who are direct descendants, and they're still Catholic. They one of the things that most people don't know is like when you think about the history, America was established around in the Virginia area, DC area, and Jamestown, and they had tobacco plantations and moved down into South Carolina. And then when they opened up Mississippi and started in Louisiana and started the sugar and the cotton industry, then they would walk people from DC and so in this particular 272, they went from DC to Louisiana. And they were in Maryland. I said DC, it was in Maryland, right outside of DC. And they were enslaved by the Jesuits, Jesuit priests in the Catholic Church. And my cousins to today is still Catholic. Yeah. But so it's a tortured history. In fact, it was one of my cousins that started the whole thing because, I helped, we doing a family reunion stuff. And so, she found out about the sale of 272 and she contacted the school. And the school said, oh, yeah, that happened. But all the people that, all the slaves, the school said all the slaves that we sent to Louisiana, they caught fever and they died and everything. That's all done. And she's like, wait a minute, I'm here as living proof. And that actually kicked off this whole process that we see today. Originally, the school was saying, yeah, we don't want to do anything because we want everybody, all of the descendants to have the same, come to agreement before we do anything. And the students at the school said, we want to pay an extra fee to fund reparations efforts, between the school and these descendants. Yes. And we can talk more about that at another time.
Tricia?
I'm going to read the next question in the chat, which is from Joe. Joe asks, if we focus on restitution and compensation as a step in this process, should the focus be on those descended from slaves or those who endured Jim Crow and redlining, or anyone who is Black, including Afro-Caribbean Americans?
Well, first, we're talking about full repair. So we may focus on one element or the other as a beginning, but we're talking about full repair. And many of the policies that were established during African chattel slavery were designed around the fact that, the victims of these policies were melanin enhanced. So it didn't matter where they came from. We talk about Marcus Garvey, he was from Jamaica, So I think that there are there's several kinds of remedies, but there may be one remedy that deals with direct descendants and another remedy that's more general. Because, and Joe, don't forget, it's not just the Africans who were harmed by this. It was the Europeans who were it was not just the Africans who were harmed by the various kinds of physical, mental injuries, and things like Black inferiority. It was also the Europeans who came with this superiority complex and were dehumanized to the point where they were willing to carry out these crimes against humanity, against other people. So they have to be, repaired as well. Different kind of repair, different process. But so the thing that we're talking about doing is, we gotta do both at the same time, because doing one or the other, it'll be like the election we just had, and we're not talking about an election. We're not talking about a low context contractual thing. We're talking about covenant. We're talking about repairing the human family. And we're talking about doing what needs to be done. And by doing that, then there will be some who will, there are some now who are suffering, the vestiges of African chattel slavery, even though they don't have descendants who were slaves, who were enslaved, and the remedies that will come that will address those legacies of African chattel slavery will benefit them just like they benefit the direct descendants.
Thank you, Woullard. We've got another question. We got a lot of questions coming in the chat function, which is great. So Keith Thompson's asked, is South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission post-apartheid an example of reparations? And isn't the truth part what is often missing from our discussion of reparations?
Yeah, the Truth and Reconciliation process, that two things. One, I'll say the Truth and Reconciliation process could be part of a reparations process. In South Africa, no. Because, really what we're talking about is full repair. When you look at South Africa, the institutional, structures that were there that privileged some and punished others, they're still there. They're still in place, and what we have to look for and what we have to accomplish is that we got to have full repair. Now, I'll just make a general comment and say that many folk will tell you that, well, what are you talking about full repair? It will cost too much. You'd have to, there's a lot that you got to do that we'd have to change too many things. But the same arguments were used against the abolitionists who were fighting against African chattel slavery. How could you end African chattel slavery? That's the engine of the American economy. Well, we look out here at the Merrimack River and those mills that line the river up, they were fed by the cotton that was produced by enslaved Africans. The insurance industry down in Hartford, that was fed by insurance policies on enslaved Africans. The finance centers of New York City, that were fed by loans made to enslavers for production during, by enslaved Africans. So, if we today are going to, sit and say, oh no, they were wrong, that was wrong, abolition was correct, we needed to end African chattel slavery, then if you take that position for them, then you got to take the position now that reparations is what's right. It may not be the least expensive thing to do, but it's what's right. And that's what makes it, so important. And that's what makes it so relevant now.
Thank you. The next question comes from Daniel, and Daniel asks, are reparations efforts by entities other than the US federal government, for example, states and corporations or universities like Georgetown that you just mentioned, are those meaningful and worth pursuing, or should we keep our primary focus on HR 40 and other federal efforts?
I would say that, in my analysis, since this is the humanities, New Hampshire humanities, I talk about this a little bit. But you know, in my analysis, one of the things that we have to deal with is the culture that we live in. And we live in a low context culture. It's binary where you can only do one thing at a time. We have to do all of that. We're talking about full repair. So there were many, you know, avenues of injury, and there can be many avenues of repair. So yes, we need to keep our eye on the federal government, its role historically, contemporarily, at HR 40 and Senate Bill 1083. But also we have to look at corporations that benefited from, you know, this policy and you know, and hold them accountable. We have to look at society in general and look at both the privileges and the punishments that were meted out based on this paradigm and work to addressing those. So dealing with corporations, there have been several municipal ordinances, and there's been state legislation all geared at reparations. And those things, while necessary, are insufficient by themselves. But yes, they are necessary. They're part of the process of full repair.
I want to move the conversation forward a little bit, Woullard. One of the questions we have in the chat function is from Jonathan Ross. And Jonathan's asked, reparations. Can you talk about what it would look like, right? Where will we be in 1 year? Maybe in 5 years? How can you move from principles to some specifics?
Well, one of the things that you know, we're looking at doing within the reparations movement is to take the time to, and that's where HR 40 comes in. Take the time to do the study, you know, and propose remedies that will bring about the kinds of full repair that we're looking for. An example or a model of reparations that we could look to as a starting place, rather than the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we can look at Germany in its response to its role in the Holocaust, where they have public markers, you know, and other kinds of activities that were designed to meet those 5 elements of repair. So, and also, you know, I mean, a common thing that happens is we got to figure this out together. You know, yes, African people as the agreed party, we have a primary role in defining, you know, what the remedy is, but we're not the only ones, as I said, because we're not the only ones that were injured in this, you know, and part of the challenge is that the social, you know, perspective that we live under creates the kind of conditions where there is, I saw a sign driving down the street, say, in the avalanche, each snowflake cries, I'm innocent, you know. And so, you know, in this reparations process, we're in it together. We're in it together. It's not just, oh, well, what are y'all, you know, what are you going to do as African people to get, you know, to move your point, move your place forward. We're talking about repair and repairing the covenant between, you know, between the fractured human family that resulted from, you know, this whole process that started, or that we identified with it started in African chattel slavery and continues through to today. So there are any number of small measures and steps that we can take. They got to be cumulative, and they have to be, you know, across the board.
The next question we've got in the chat is from Richard, who asks, if the US federal government or states are less inclined to consider reparations, might churches be a more feasible institution to repair the harms?
Again, we're talking about full repair. Churches have a part. Churches have a part. We just talked about the Catholic Church and the Jesuits. You know, I mean, churches have a part, and their participation is necessary, but insufficient by itself. And we can't talk about the possibility that the U.S. government or the states might not want to do something. We are the U.S. government and the states, so it's up to us to make it happen. This is not about charity. This is about justice. It's not for us to ask them hand in hand, oh, please, could you help us out? You know, could you do us right and stop doing us wrong? Please don't kick me no more. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about justice. And the point is, for full repair, it requires you and me to look at ourselves, to look at our covenant, as part of the human family, and decide, how do we bring about the kind of repair that's required?
Woullard, we got time for a couple more questions, but you touched upon the work that Germany had done in relative to their work with those who were impacted, the Jewish folks who were impacted during the horrible time. Can you talk a little bit more about that? You talked about full repair. So what are some examples that they instituted that represent this concept called full repair?
Yeah, I can't talk a lot about it, but I can talk a little, and I brought it up to contrast what happened there to what happened in South Africa, actually. But some of the things that Germany did was to include in their curriculum, in their textbooks, in their educational system, the facts and the truth about, or I say the facts and the truth, but facts about what happened with not only Jews, but other marginalized communities in Germany during the Nazi era. They, put up markers and, statutes and other things that identify, problematic things that happened, and sort of work towards making a full public accounting of what's going on. Even now in America, we just had a presidential election, and it continues, it leading even before Trump, politics was filled with what they call dog whistles. A dog whistle is this little whistle, you blow it, humans can't hear it, but dogs can. And, much of this racist and race-based dialogue that happens is just that, a dog whistle. Regular people hear it and they think, oh, well, they're just doing whatever, but it's sending out these messages. And so part of what we need, what we have to do, and we talk about it in the international definition, is have a full accounting of what actually happened here in America in terms of African chattel slavery. Because, and one of the ways we know that that hasn't happened is because the same people that define people as property in terms of African chattel slavery turned around and defined property as people with the Citizens United, court case. So, we got work to do.
We've got some good reading list recommendations in the chat too. If anyone, we're out of time pretty much here, but there's some recommendations for reading. Shout out to Joe and to Peggy and to Jonathan for those book recommendations and article recommendations in the chat. We'll post those on our website too afterwards. Tonight's program will also be available online if you want to watch it again. Just give us a day or two to get that up on our YouTube channel. I want to thank Woullard Lett very much for joining us tonight, and I'm going to turn it back over to Anthony to close us out.
Well, I just want to thank you, Woullard, for your presentation and sharing your wealth of experience in this particular topic. On a personal note, I want to give a shout out to my buddy Joe Antolin out there coming in from Chicago, which is wonderful to see out there, Joe. Thanks for tuning in. And I just want to close by reminding everybody about next week's final presentation for this series season with Dr. Yvonne Goldsberry. Again, she'll be joining in the conversation with her program, Awakening to Racism as a Public Health Issue, a Historical Perspective. Same time, same bad channel. So a week from today, 6 p.m., look for information on the website. I want to thank you so much for allowing us to use the humanities and New Hampshire humanities in particular to build community. With this level of exchange here in the chat function, clearly demonstrates its growth in community. So I'm happy to be a part of something that frankly is much larger than this institution. It's about us coming together as part, as Woullard described, the human family and sharing our inspiring stories. So again, thank you so much. We appreciate you all. Stay safe, mask up, and see you next week.